Thanks for coming. My name's Naomi. I studied special needs education back in Belgium. And I was asked to come and give a workshop about how do we recognize if a student has special needs in your classroom, because many students are in our classrooms, but we don't know they actually need some extra attention, and how we can help them, even the small little things we can try and do as teachers. So are there any people here who've already heard about special needs, who've had workshops about it, who know a little bit about it? Yes, you a little bit. Yeah, okay. So what I'm basically gonna do, there are many disabilities. There's an international classification that's called the DSM-5. It's a big book full of different kind of disabilities, but it's also like things like trauma. Trauma can affect how someone works a lot sometimes when they have PTSD, that kind of stuff. It has any kind of disabilities that to do with the mental disabilities, so not the physical ones. If you're interested to know them all, you can look up DSM-5, but it's a very boring book. If I'm honest, it's full of just what the symptoms are, that kind of stuff. But I'll keep it to like the ones that are most common in the classrooms and that we don't notice, because the kids, they're normal, like they look normal, they don't have any specific features that you would say, this one has a disability, but they actually do have difficulties with certain aspects of learning. So there's a difference between learning gaps. We make a difference between a learning gap, which is a student that has difficulties with something, but it's just a gap that they will be able to close with sufficient support. And then there's learning difficulties or learning disabilities such as dyslexia or dyscalculia. I don't know if you've ever heard of those ones, which are things that students will keep always having even in adult life, and they need special help in class to be able for them to keep up with the rest of the classroom. And then you also have, we call them neurodevelopmental disorders, which is basically ADHD, autism. I don't know if you've heard about those ones, but those ones have also an effect on how students learn and how they can keep up in the classrooms. So I'll just go through a few ones, just the most common ones. I won't make it very complicated, I'll keep it short, just so you know which ones they are, and maybe in your classroom you can, when you have a child, you can maybe recognize them. So let me start with dyslexia. Has anyone heard of dyslexia? You have, okay. So dyslexia is basically students who have problems with reading, writing, and spelling. So anything that has to do with reading and writing or spelling. They have different kinds. I'm not going to go into those ones because it's a bit complicated, but in general it's about that. Here you'll find it online. They show it's a text where the words aren't written correctly, but you're still able to read them. Like if you don't have dyslexia, you have no problems reading it, because when you read, you actually just see the first and last letter, and this is the word. Your mind kind of automates reading. It's like driving. In the beginning, it's very complicated. You're learning. Okay, I need to shift gear. I need to press my foot down. I need to look. I need to turn the wheel. And in the beginning, it's really complicated because you need to think about all these things. But after a while, you don't even think about it. You're just driving, and your body knows what to do. It's the same with reading and writing, spelling. Your body, after some time, your brain knows. So when you're reading this one, we can even if you want, I can pass it around so you can just look at the text. You'll see you're able to read it. But students with dyslexia, they can't. They didn't automate it correctly. So when you give them a text, they'll take a longer time to read it or to write or all of those kind of things. So from a, like, there's different ways of knowing the child might have dyslexia if you follow them up throughout the years. So they say in preschool, it's not very easy to, you can't already know because they're learning to write and read, but you could already see that they're having troubles with like letters, with recognizing them. They'll have trouble you know, trying to make sense of the letters and the words. Then after, when they come to primary, that's when we really start to say you can diagnose them. Actually, because then they start to, they have a lot of difficulty reading and following up with class. They have difficulty spelling the words, and they take like a lot longer than the rest of the class to do it. They won't always understand either. Like, no, they understand the words, so they have no problem with understanding the words. They just, when it's on paper, they can't really read it and they don't really understand it, and it gets all mingled up. Is that clear? A little bit? So from an adolescent, you can see it as well. They'll take 3 to 4 times longer to read a text. They'll have problems with intonation, and they'll have problems spelling. They'll always make mistakes. Even when you try to correct them, they'll keep doing it because it doesn't automate. So I know I have friends who have dyslexia, who are my age, and they still make mistakes. Even if they try very hard, it doesn't come the same way to them as it would to most people. So those are things you can, you know, when you see a child on the test that's always making mistakes, after a while, even when you keep correcting them, or if there's a child who, even when they're reading, they're very slow, maybe they have dyslexia. So at that point, you need to try and, you know, they should go diagnose. I think you do it in the hospitals. And then I'll show you later what we can do to help these children, because we also need to accept that they'll never be able to do exactly the same. They'll keep making mistakes, even on the tests. They'll keep making mistakes in later life, but we can give them tools to try and do it as least as possible, so they can keep up with the class. Because learning, they have no problems learning things, they just have problems with the writing and the reading. So, the next one is dyscalculia. Have you heard about that one? Dyscalculia. It's a complicated word. It just means it's problems who have trouble, like you have people who have trouble with reading, writing, then this one, they have just trouble with math. So it means the child has problems with numbers, recognizing them, math. So again, here you see like different phases. Preschool, we don't diagnose because they're still very young, they're learning. Then you have, so that you can already see maybe they have trouble with recognizing numbers, that kind of things. It's difficult for them to recognize them, to understand what they are. Then in the primary years, then they start to have trouble with math problems. They have problems with spatial recognition, so geometry, those kind of things. Clock reading is difficult. Numbers counting is difficult, and recognizing serial numbers. Like with math, we learn like 2, 4, 6, 8. Like for them, this is difficult. Which are the next numbers that come? So these are all things that they have trouble with. Then in later years, also in adolescence, they'll have the same problems with arithmetic problems, like, you know, everything to do with math. They'll have problems remembering formulas because they don't make sense. They have problem with history sometimes because you need to learn a lot of numbers. Geometry, all those kind of things is dyscalculia. So if you have a child in your classroom in primary, you'll see that after a while, if they can't keep up with the class because they have difficulties with numbers, this could be a reason. So these are the main learning learning difficulties, disabilities that they can have in the classrooms. Important, but I'll talk about it later as well. These are things that you don't see easily because they're like you can't see it at a child. The only way you'll know is if the teacher recognizes it when they're correcting, when they're teaching the child, or maybe the parents if the parent is very involved in the child's learning. But other than that, it's difficult to know if a child has either of those. So your role in that is very important. The next ones I want to go over are ADHD and autism. Those are neurodevelopmental disorders. Maybe you've heard about those. Have you heard about ADHD? No? You have. Okay. I'll just spell it, but it's not very complicated. But it's a long word. ADHD is short for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Basically what it is in the word. You have two facets to it: low attention span and hyperactivity. Now, people like to make things complicated. In ADHD, you have three kinds of ADHD. You have the one where you just have low attention span, but there's no hyperactivity. You have the one where there's just hyperactivity, but attention span is okay. And then you have the one that's both. So, the most easy, well actually they're both pretty easy, but the most easy to recognize is hyperactivity, because the child will be like always moving, they can't stop, they'll be looking around in the classroom, maybe tapping their foot the entire time, maybe being busy with their hands. You know, they can't sit still, they'll just be, and then outside of the classroom they'll be the ones just moving around. It's as if they have like an engine and you can't stop it. It's just, they'll just be crazy moving around all the time. So those children have very much difficulty to stay still. They move around a lot, they'll be constantly busy, and in their head it's the same. They'll always be thinking, always be doing things in their heads, you know, it's like their brain can't stop. When people with ADHD sometimes have problems sleeping, those kind of things, they won't be able to sit still. They can't concentrate very long. But sometimes when they're very interested in something, they'll be able to, they call it hyper-focused, and they can concentrate very long on one thing, but then after that they'll be moving around